Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the adventure campaign Rise of Vecna, designed by Scott McClintock, Marc Altfuldisch, and Kathleen Harrington for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or on my submission form at roguewatson.com. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. What if all of the 5th edition campaigns failed, ended in complete failure? What would the world look like? And also, what if it turns out the main plots of every single one of those campaigns was actually behind Vecna, who is a granddaddy, big bad ass lich of Forgotten Realms lore? What if Vecna was behind the cult of the dragon and the giant ordning and ordered a Serac to create this baby lich god so Vecna himself could appear in the Forgotten Realms world with a corporeal form? These are some neat ideas, and I'll be damned if Rise of Vecna does a really cool job crafting a full-on 5th edition adventure campaign with a crazy, dark, twisted world in which basically Vecna won because all these campaigns failed, and has created this really interesting, dark, twisted version of the Forgotten Realms, specifically the Sword Coast. This is a full campaign that starts at level 3. Now, technically, it is the Doomed Forgotten Realms Volume 2. I think this is a little bit of a production misstep, because this Volume 1 was the Academy of Adventure, which is a perfectly fine standalone way of introducing players, especially new players, to 5e, and it gets them to level 3, which makes sense because this campaign starts at 3rd level. And then it has this really weird variant where it's like, oh, and then you can end things with this crazy, like, oh, by the way, your artificial creations that were grown in like tubes and vats, and this whole world's been taken over by Vecna and all this other stuff, which I thought was a crazy, weird way of ending that seemingly normal adventure. After reading this campaign, then that one makes a little more sense in context. But it's a little weird because that is technically Volume 1 and this is Volume 2. You do not at all have to play Volume 1, however. This absolutely will give players up to speed and has them start off as, literally you can just have have the players awakened as those artificial organisms which are grown in the vats, because Vecna is powered by death and weakened by life. So if he creates artificial life without people being born, just created in tubes, he can kind of bypass the whole life process, and thus people are just continually dying all the time. So it's, again, very dark, twisted world, and yet still works in the context of a 5e fantasy campaign, and really does a cool job of it really feels like those Marvel What If episodes, but for Forgotten Realms, where it has direct references to Storm King's Thunder and Princes of the Apocalypse and Descent into Avernus, Tyranny of Dragons. There's even bits of Out of the Abyss. Really, the only ones that it doesn't cover are the ones that specifically don't take place in the Sword Coast region. See if I can. There we go. There's the map. So mainly Tomb of Annihilation and Rime of the Frostmaiden, which are ironically the ones that I'm most familiar with and the ones that I've been playing in our recent campaigns. But if you are familiar with the Sword Coast region, and most folks are by now because that's kind of what we cover, I know what you're thinking. Oh, great, another campaign adventure in the Sword Coast. But because this uses that dark twist of, hey, all of those campaigns failed, and because they all failed, now the elemental evil cults have taken over the Desaran Valley, and now it's just called this like throne of primordial unification, and all the cults are established there. Now you've got the cult of the dragon has basically taken over entire cities. The giants' ordning has been shattered, and so there's entire giant villages that are set up that are, kind of ruling different roosts, and the storm giants are completely displaced and have been basically rooted out of their home, which actually, in fact, Storm King's Thunder has the biggest reference, because you'll actually end up, the climax is, in a way, almost similar to the climax of Storm King's Thunder, where you go to the Maelstrom, but instead it's been, of course, taken over by undead and a Krakow Lich at the end. So really, really cool remixes that, in a way, reward people for being veterans of 5th edition specifically and having played through those campaigns. On the other hand, weirdly, it doesn't include any advice on how to run this campaign if your players have successfully completed those adventures and thus thwarted those bad things from happening. There's no kind of alternate like storylines or references to, oh, well, because we at least completed the Tyranny of Dragon story, then this is all you find left of the cult in this area or something. That would have been really cool if it had made some effort to kind of pick and choose. Instead, this just says, no, they all failed. So the only way to really run it is either you haven't played any of those campaigns, or you just you tell your players, hey, this is a multiverse, like we're literally playing a what if scenario if you hadn't played those, which I think is an interesting one, especially if your players have played those, especially Storm King's Thunder, and then can see the what if you had failed, and then, what if Vecna was behind everything. But the designer, unless I missed it, which is possible, it's over 120 pages, doesn't mention advice for running any of that. There's just a really cool setup, though. I love the opening intro where it has these like bold-faced subheadings, mainly in how it with the Soulmonger plotline, which is the Tomb of Annihilation story with the Atropos and Aesoret creating this the death curse, and it just says, and so the Soulmonger fed, and so the Soulmonger fed. It basically goes through all of the different stories, the Tyranny of Dragons, Out of the Abyss, the wizard releasing demons all through the abyss. That was really Vecna behind everything, and the giant ordning, that was really Vecna behind everything, and it just basically explains how Vecna is the like Thanos of the Forgotten Realms universe, and has been the ultimate BBEG. On the one hand, I'm kind of disappointed that this is a level 3 through like 9 campaign, because you're thinking, oh shit, we're in this like post-apocalyptic, like all those have failed. Now we've got to go fight Vecna. It's the only thing left to do. It's got to take a high level, threat. We're in the end game now. That's not actually what happens here. And at first I was disappointed, but then once I started reading the campaign, I was like, okay, this makes sense, because we're more in the, to keep using the Marvel analogy, we're more in the time heist part of it, like the first half of Endgame, where we have to literally go collect stones. And I'm not even kidding, you're literally collecting magic fucking stones here, which I'm totally fine with. In terms of D&D plot structure, going around collecting items totally works in a lot of cases. You can obfuscate that as much as you want, but for basic main quest shit, if you just need to have your players go do a thing to say, hey, there's a thing you need over here, you got to go get it. It is a bummer that the campaign is excessively linear. I was hoping there was a point at which the players would be given a choice between, hey, here's 3 things you need to go get, and here are the different areas, and we have to get them all eventually, but you can, choose your order and go and get them. That's not really what happens here. And in fact, you can see on the map that we literally go A, B, C, D, E. Like, that is the order in which this entire campaign plays. And the only things that are optional, they are technically optional. Like Xantharl's Keep is optional, but it's on the way. Like, literally, you end up traveling from a road north to south. You start in Mirabar. The entire first chapter is in Mirabar, which I will go over things beat by beat a little bit, but this is a very long 100-some page campaign, so I'm going to have to kind of montage some of this. But there's not really necessarily optional stuff. It's basically all stuff you're going to be doing along the way, so it is a little bit linear. Well, it's not even a little bit. It is very linear in that way. Every single story beat has to happen one after the other. There is no point at which it necessarily opens up, which I found a little bit disappointing, but that is the challenge of game design, right? You want to create these cool stories and craft these cool moments and make sure your players are at the right level, but at the same time, you want to also be able to give them some choices and make sure their stuff is very meaningful, and at least even giving them the illusion of choice where, again, you can go pick up, different things you can do. I never like playing or running a campaign that is completely open world, because I think that's just very, very overwhelming for a DM. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily want to play one that's just 100% like super to where you only have like one location to go to either. And I feel like this one's a little too close to that for my comfort. It has an excellent, excellent adventure summary and flowchart. However, I read this page and knew everything about the story, which is awesome. That is so important for especially these big campaigns. The plot is not overly difficult to understand. I don't want to say that as a knock against the story, because I think the story is very satisfying. There's just not necessarily a lot of political intrigue or a lot of multiple NPCs to juggle. It very much feels like a campaign that's decently easy to run, even with all the things going on, in that, again, it's the collecting of the stones. There's basically, the main plot is you wake up in Mirabar under these vats. You very quickly meet the resistance leader, and she says, hey, there are, the gods have been cut off from the world. Like, the bad guys have taken over. Obviously, we're still trying to fight back against Vecna. You've been given some little things that mean you've got more, autonomy than most vat-grown artificial creatures do. There are 3 stones that we can collect that will, in theory, I think it's... Right now, Vecna has prevented the gods from returning, and shattering those 3 stones will allow the gods to return to this plane, which will then presumably allow them to take on and defeat Vecna. So your goal is to collect these 3 ancient stones, and you get one of them pretty soon in Mirabar, and then the rest of the adventure is getting those other 2 stones, and then you end up going to the final area where you can actually use the stones to do a thing that allows that activate their magic that then brings back the gods and things. So that's fine. That's a pretty solid plot structure, and I think it does a pretty good job of upscaling things from that 3rd level up until 9th level. So kind of quickly, let's go through each chapter kind of one by one. You can see here's an example of the linearity. So the one optional area, again, Xantharl's Keep, which is listed specifically as an optional area. There's a confusing structure here because chapter 5 is 1 area and chapter 6 is like 4 areas. And it could have been chapter 6, could have been 4 chapter. Like, it was very oddly the way that was kind of organized. And there's no reason why like parts of chapter 6 are also could be optional. And one of the areas it lists in there is a main quest thing. So I don't know. It's kind of a little bit confusing with the way the chapters are split up. But really, these only are optional if you literally walk through an area. The DM describes cool things happening. You're like, nope, I keep going. Like, that's to the context that things are optional, I guess. Otherwise, you're basically going through all of these things in order. All right. So chapter 1, Mirabar. Like I said, you wake up. We do get maps of the region, by the way, as well as full-color battle maps for any of the major dungeon crawls. There are certain areas that don't have maps, but most of them, I believe, do. So the opening quest is defeating a bunch of mephits that are constantly respawning. There's a cool connection to the elemental plane of fire and a little bit of a Frost Maiden nod where you have to deal with these mephits. And then eventually... there's even a heist you can initiate in a goblin fortress inside the city. You battle through a walled garden that's been corrupted in order to slay an undead archdryad. That's all just chapter 1, like getting through I think, level 3, and that's just in that opening city. And then chapter 2, you go into this underground area beneath Mirabar because you're supposed to go find the person who was supposed to get the stone. And it's this huge underground, like 300-mile, they call it a great underground highway, and it is just filled with thousands of zombies with these spectral skulls that can kind of control the zombies, but also pacify them and act like beacons. And it becomes this interesting gauntlet of traveling because there's also this demonic entity that can possess all the zombies, and he technically wants the players to reach his tomb, which is where they also find the courier who's got the stone. But also wants the players to get there as weakened as possible. Literally, you play this demon like a DM, basically. And the players are supposed to make it through this mass swarm of undead, which aren't all necessarily hostile. It's more of an exploration thing. But then, every time the players try to sleep or long rest or something, then they get attacked by all the zombies. So they're just supposed to be going through this horrific just exercise of exhaustion as they try to make it through all these zombies and different zombified creatures and a final tomb against the bearded devil. I thought it was a really cool scenario and a neat situation. An example of one that doesn't have a map, but the tomb does because it's a single fight area, whereas this giant underground highway doesn't really have a map for that. There's a neat twist in chapter 3 where you go back to turn in the quest, and it turns out that your contact has been compromised, and the bad guys are like doppelgangers in disguise, and they attack the players. There's this big, exciting moment where you have to escape out of Mirabar, which I really loved. The designer does a really good job of creating these very cool, memorable action moments, which I love because those are the big highlights for me out of a lot of these adventures. I think it's very hard to write those dramatic story-based moments because a lot of those are going to come organically based on who the player characters are and what their connections are to other NPCs, and that's on the DM to create a lot of those most of the time. I like, obviously seeing some of them. But what I especially like to see from an adventure giving me is those cool, big cinematic action moments that are really just awesome and memorable set pieces. And holy crap, does this campaign do that in spades, which I absolutely love. And a lot of those kind of escape sequences are like that. And just having that moment where you go back to turn the quest in, and all of a sudden there's bad guys there, and you're like, oh shit, what's going on? That's a really cool twist. In chapter 4, you think the world is going to open up, but it really doesn't. You technically finally leave the opening city of Mirabar, and you're traveling down towards... the main quest is to go to Tribor, by the way, which is quite a few more. You have to travel through Xantharl's Keep and Longsaddle. If you've played through Storm King's Thunder, a lot of these names you should remember. If not, just they're on the Forgotten Realms map, the Sword Coast map, I guess. Xantharl's Keep has been, which chapter 4 it's only 2 pages and includes some areas that the players I don't think will ever get to. Luskan, Evernight, Neverwinter Wood. The important thing is it includes some travel encounters. I don't think there are nearly enough travel encounters here. in terms of how much travel the players do, although it does mention that once they get above a certain level, you probably don't need to do travel encounters anymore, which is fine, but there's a certain point where you go from Tribor to Helm's Hold, which is a pretty good distance. If I can flip through, let's see, page 19, let's go back to the map here, which was like across, there it is. You can see here where it's marked D, and then you go all the way across to F, and there's nothing in between there. There's no events or anything, so you just have to rely on these few travel encounters that you have. That's a long way to travel, so I thought we probably could have used some more, especially given the unique circumstances of this world. And there's a really cool one. There's like this mirror merchant who offers you just regular-looking mirrors, but the first one you buy is actually a magic mirror, and how much you pay for it depends on how many charges it has. I thought that was really cool. I mean, there's some neat stuff here, but they all... I wanted like twice as many encounters just based on, again, this is such a cool dark world. There's so many different encounter things you can do. So chapter 5 is, again, that optional Zentharl's Keep, which has been turned into a sanitarium because an Underdark Fairs has opened up and infected this whole area, and the Weevil makes an appearance from, I believe that's Storm King's Thunder as well, and has transformed this entire place into a sanitarium, or they call it Insanitarium, run by Slod. And it's not so much a dungeon crawl as it is a interesting just area of exploration, I guess. You meet a bunch of, mentally disturbed people, and they've all got different, hang-ups and things. One person like speaks backwards with everything he says. There's just a lot of interesting little quirks and things that you have to deal with here, and then eventually it does turn into a boss fight. There's a really creepy part where you could be like, going through this madness-infected series of like, I don't know, almost astral plane fights and things, and you end up on like a slab with the red Slod talking to you about, your craziness, and then can inject your brain with a Slod egg even, which is pretty creepy. And thankfully the designer does mention in the beginning, like, hey, this area involves some loss of agency, so just be careful about using that with your players. I think it's a really cool area, and again, showcases how dark and creepy this whole zone is, to have just a Slod sanitarium just there on the surface of the world, just as, normal building has just been transformed into that. Very cool. The ruins of Long Saddle, another example of a place that's been corrupted and infected. This time there's some beer that like shrinks you down. You can go talk to the Harpel Archmage, who gives you a quest to fill up these gems at the elemental planes, which have converged, and these gems turn into elemental gems, which are very good magic items. So that's pretty cool, and that's pretty much all that's there. Tribor is your first really basically safe town. You can talk to Zephyrius, which I think is different from the one in Storm King's Thunder. I know it is, because it's he's really one of the royal characters from the Storm Giant royal family, which is a whole bunch of NPCs in Storm King's Thunder. And he's changed his name and been displaced out of there because of the ordning and everything that's been happening from Storm King's Thunder. You meet him in Tribor. He gives you the location of the next gem, and then you can defend the town from a bunch of mountain giant attacks, which is pretty neat. In terms of, there are some areas which I thought in particular were underdeveloped and disappointingly bare, considering how excited I was at the prospect of this adventure and all the different things that could be reflected on, the fact that all these campaigns failed. And I wrote down 3 of them specifically in 3 different areas, and we just got to the first one, which is the Temple of Elemental Unity, that I thought were not nearly as interesting as I wanted them to be. So the Temple of Elemental Unity is like, okay, Prince of the Apocalypse, that campaign failed for the players. They succeeded at taking over that entire region, and now they've got this 4 different elemental areas that all have all have active portals to their respective elemental planes, and then they converge at this Temple of Elemental Unity, and you think, oh, this is gonna be a cool freaking awesome dungeon thing, and there's just nothing. There's like one battle with a bunch of cultists, and then you just walk up to each portal and hold up your gem, and then it's done. That's very, very disappointing. And then later on in the campaign, you're supposed to go to the plane of water to retrieve an item, and again, there's not even a map for that. It's just you fight like one battle and you walk out of there. So I thought those were real disappointing and kind of lame. And then the third area is the one that's supposed to reflect the Cult of the Dragon in a random town called Leylon. And again, that was it just kind of mentions it in a page like this, where it's just, hey, you fight a bunch of Cult of the Dragon people and they're doing dragon shit there. And that's basically it for the references on that one. Helm's Hold is not a full dungeon crawl. It's kind of a smaller area, but you do fight a few people in there. Mainly, I like the custom bad guys are all these just Vecna cultists, essentially. But it has an amazing, amazing egress where you rescue this character who becomes kind of your major NPC for the next part of the campaign. This knight, and it turns out he's a Hell Rider, and he's got a infernal war machine of the Redeemer. All the characters hop in there. He puts the soul coins in, puts the demon ichor in, and you fucking bust off and you go down this awesome chase sequence of Helm's Hold, and you're being chased by like dudes on giant severed hands coming after you. It sounds like He-Man almost in a way with all these crazy vehicles. There's like spies on the roof shooting you with crossbows, and then you smash through a barricade, and this hole opens up, and this zombie purple worm comes out and just tries to eat you, and you gotta slam the brakes on and fight this zombie purple worm before you can escape. Fucking awesome. I absolutely love this situation so much. That's an example of those big, cool, cinematic, memorable moments that really highlight this campaign to such a good degree. Leylon's unfortunately one of those areas that, again, I thought was just very underdeveloped, underwhelming. Just you fight some cultists and some young black dragons, and that's the Cult of the Dragon stuff. It does such a good job at Storm King's Thunder especially, and then the references to princes and the Cult of the Dragon, Tyranny of Dragons, were both very underwhelming for me. So Chapter 7, Thornhold. So when you rescue Maximus, you do get the second one, and he tells you, hey, my contact is... I forget if you get the second... You might have gotten the second one from Zephyrus and the third one from him. I forget the exact order of where the stones are. Anyway, it's a big campaign. So he tells you to go to Thornhold and says, my contact is there, the one who's been giving me this quest, and he's got more information about, how to do all this. And I love the twist on who the contact is. That is freaking amazing. Thornhold is a little bit of a dungeon crawl, kind of an overland dungeon crawl where you make it through this bullywug-infested area. They're worshippers of Jubilex. So there's all this nasty, ooze that has all this different effects on you. There's a bullywug shaman Jubilex worshipper who is immune to acid and so fights inside of gelatinous cube, which I freaking love. Is amazing. Turns out the contact is the Xanathar. The Xanathar has been deposed and had to leave Waterdeep because, again, worse bad guys than him took over, and the enemy of the enemy is your friend. So you get to ally with the Xanathar. To get to him, you have to make it through his lair, which he has gone increasingly paranoid, and there's this huge gauntlet of traps you have to go through, a little bit of a death trap dungeon. I love the twist that all the traps are specifically designed to keep out undead, because the Xanathar is worried about the undead threat, not necessarily like player character adventurers, because there really aren't those anymore. So you'll be like a room full of like running water to keep out vampires and stuff. Some of the traps are still bad for everybody, obviously, but a lot of those are kind of tongue-in-cheek and designed to be a little bit fun. So you meet with the Xanathar, and he gives you the rest of the campaign information, becomes your next big quest giver, and says, hey, you need to get, basically it becomes another item, a fetch quest. It says, okay, you need, with all 3 stones, we can go to the Maelstrom, which is the Storm Giant's lair, or at least was back before Vecna took over. And you take all 3 stones there and crush them using this certain item at this certain location, and then that will finally, it's the Mount Doom thing. That's what we need to do, and that will bring back all the gods, and Bob's your uncle, we're home free. You have to go get a conch shell from a mountain giant village in order to teleport to the Maelstrom, which is more of a heist disguise thing. It's literally filled with like dozens and dozens of giants. You're not meant to go fight them all. You're meant to go in through and steal and disguise and kind of heist your way through, which I appreciate, a little bit different. You also need to grab a scepter from the elemental plane of water, which again is just this little bit here. It's like, hey, you fight like, 1 or 2 battles and then you're out of the elemental plane of water. Very disappointing area for it's like, oh shit, we're going to the elemental plane of water. Oh, that's all we're doing. Okay. And then Chapter 9 is the Maelstrom, which is a very cool dark twist on the end of Storm King's Thunder, which I guess it's not the end, because at the end of Storm King's Thunder, you fight Iamrith in her lair, so maybe it's the penultimate. Anyway, yeah, the Storm King, the Storm Giant lair is there. This one, I believe, is a different custom new map for it, maybe just partially based on that other one from Storm King's Thunder. And the Maelstrom is now bereft of giants because they've all been basically undeadified at this point, and you do fight some undead giant mummies, which is pretty cool, including some of the royal family. There are chuls everywhere, there's zombie whales everywhere, mummy lords, giant mummies, and this Krakow Lich is the big boss, and I love the fact that during this entire dungeon, the Krakow Lich constantly taunts you and talks to you, because aboleths are really cool like that, and they can communicate telepathically and try to dominate people and enslave. It's basically this unique undead aboleth is what it is. It's not a kraken or a lich at all. But it's a really cool enemy and a neat boss. On the one hand, it's kind of disappointing we're never going to actually fight Vecna or anything, but we're also only level, I believe, 9 by the time we get to this point. So it makes sense that, okay, this is our actual threat level right now, and I think it still does a really good job of pulling together all these different areas and a variety of creatures and dungeons and locations and NPCs to deal with and all of that. And I think it ends up at a pretty satisfying note. And there's some cool stuff for Zephyrus. You end up getting him back, and during that, you had to get him for the ruling scepter and the conch shell, and then he has a lot of things to say in that final battle and things when he sees his royal family's all been undeadified or controlled or whatever. So there's some good exploration and role-playing moments in this final dungeon. And then it's got some really satisfying epilogue endings, which I liked. That basically it says one of them is just, hey, you do this and it instantly you save the day, and the gods immediately act. They come back and strike down Vecna, and everybody's saved, yay. Although the world's still in bad shape, we can slowly rebuild and change things. The other one you can do is say, okay, there's a tease around the Frostmain where it turns out these obelisks that have been kind of these Easter eggs placed throughout some of the campaigns are actually devices that let you teleport back through time. So after you defeat Vecna, you get access to this obelisk that lets you go back in time to before all of this bad stuff happened, and a chance to kind of right all the wrongs, which I think is just more of a cool epilogue than anything else. And then the third ending is to say, okay, you have weakened the veil. The gods can come back, but they haven't been able to quite plunge through and take down Vecna. So Vecna, you basically did the first step towards taking down Vecna's rule. Stay tuned, because we're going to be making another campaign that actually has you hopefully taking on Vecna, which is called Doomed Forgotten Realms, Fall of Vecna. And there's a lot of cool things you can do. It even mentions in the precursor about all the things Vecna did, and it said at some point, somebody, I forgot who, I think it was one of the gods, raised a Tarrasque to go fight Vecna, and Vecna just killed the Tarrasque, and then it raised the Tarrasque as a zombie Tarrasque. That's one of the things you can do as one of the teases. Very, very cool ideas. So you may get up to 10th level at the end, and I am fully expecting, since initially I was disappointed this one wasn't that one, I think we're getting one that's going to be the actual, hey, here's the tier 3 and tier 4 campaign. We're going to end up punching Vecna in the mouth at the end, and holy shit, I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to it, because I think the production values of this campaign are very, very impressive. The editing is perfect. I had no problems with the way it was. It was very easy for me to read, understand, get excited about things. The way it's laid out, everything is well done. The appendices do a good job of giving you all the extra information for what this Doomed Forgotten Realms looks like in certain areas that you need to know about, basically. Who Vecna is, all the important things there. Not necessarily like everything there is to know, but just give me the important stuff. And then dozens and dozens of new stat blocks and a few magic items. All right, let's go over my pros and cons to this very massive adventure campaign. Pro, explore a uniquely dark, twisted what-if campaign for the Forgotten Realms. The actual premise of it is so damn cool, where what if all those campaigns failed? What does the Sword Coast look like then? And not only that, but what if turns out it was Vecna that was behind everything and is the ultimate big bad? Very, very cool idea that I ran with. Pro, filled with several amazing memorable scenes, such as trekking through a zombie-filled underground highway and escaping a thrilling chase via an infernal war machine. I mentioned the fact that this has all those really good, cinematically cool adventure moments that feel very cool. And highlight different exciting things the players are doing. In other words, there's still, even though the world is still very dark and twisted, there's a lot of opportunities for heroism and just doing badass stuff that I appreciate. Multiple satisfying endings, including a tease for the next entry in the Doomed Forgotten Realms series. I'm probably most excited about that, because I honestly want to see this story keep going. I think this has a lot of great stuff in there, and the premise is so interesting that I want to keep exploring what's happening here. And I think there's more story to tell. I want to be able to go fight Vecna in the end, and I want to be able to start that process going and start this rebellion, even though the world has just been totally fucked like this. And don't give me the easy like time travel backward thing. Like, let me deal with it right here and now. Pro, over 30 new stat blocks, including many custom creatures. I just kind of montaged over all that, but there's a lot. It would be nice if there was art for all those creatures instead of just a bunch of stat blocks, but it's still cool that we get a lot of them. Pro, excellent production, layout, and editing. As I mentioned, it's a gorgeous product to look at. And Pro, full color battle maps for dungeons and region maps for towns and areas. The designers have assured me that there are separate player maps for all of those things. I don't have access to them as of yet, and I believe they're not quite available at the time of this review, but they should be added so I assume all the maps that you saw in here that were embedded have been included as separate player maps as well, which is a big thumbs up. I do have some criticisms, though. As much as I really love this adventure and think it's one of the best and most interesting adventure campaigns that I have reviewed in my years of doing this, I do have some criticisms. One con is that the story assumes all the official 5e campaigns failed and there are no alternate plans if you already successfully completed them. I wish there was like just a sidebar, a note, or something that said, hey, if your players successfully completed Tyranny of Dragons, then maybe make this change. Or if your players have played through, some of this campaign, then make this change. Or if they did complete Storm King's Thunder, can you even do this campaign? Because it doesn't seem like you can. Then, or if your players did complete some of those, then just run this as a multiverse thing. What if? And then they'll appreciate all those references even more. And I just wish there was some information about that, and there's really not. Con, the Temple of Elemental Unity, Leylon, which is the Cult of the Dragon area, and the Elemental Plane of Water areas are all disappointingly bare and underdeveloped compared to a lot of the, they don't all have to be room-to-room dungeon crawls or big maps or anything like that, but I at least expected more than like a single page of just, hey, here's a single fight, and that's basically all that's going on. Expand that area, explore those zones, especially because some of them are, in the case of the Elemental Plane of Water, that is a main quest thing. The rest of them are side quest jaunts, but that one was a main quest. You have to go and collect this certain item from the Elemental Plane of Water. Explore it a little more. That could have been a whole chapter or something. I know at some point you got to try to condense and organize and get to the meat of everything, but especially because I was looking forward to how, what does the Prince of the Apocalypse thing look like? What does the Tyranny of Dragons look like? And it turns out they were just kind of disappointing compared to the other ones. And the final con, I wish there were more travel encounters. There's only like 5 or 6, and there's a lot of traveling involved here, especially between that chapter that goes from Tribor to Helm's Hold, and I just wish there was more things for the players to do, I guess, while traveling, because it's such an interesting world, and I wish it reflected more of that. And travel encounters are the easiest, best tool you have to reflect upon that world, whether it's, and the few examples we have, like Neverwinter Woods is full of undead, so they come out of the, undead every time, and maybe just, dark people getting dark events happening where people are eating each other, or, there's zombies on the road just randomly, like whatever situation is going on, I think could do a good job of reflecting that dark world. Final verdict. Rise of Vecna is a grand what-if campaign where the good guys lost every 5e campaign and evil has taken over, showcasing a uniquely twisted world of infernal war machines, zombie hordes, beholder allies, and slotty sanitariums. There's a phrase I want to say more often in these reviews. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.